This is all very new for you, Stephen. I would like to hone in on you and talk to you a bit about all the things that you're learning and any of your burning questions. By the way, do any of your friends still want to call with us and talk to us? It's okay if you're too busy to talk. But I would love to talk to some of your friends, Stephen. Here, I'll share screens and we'll go over some things. I want to make sure you guys know how to answer basic questions that people come to us with. Take your time getting to the phone, Stephen. Good to see you, Robert, and Manuel, and Adam, and Adriano. Everybody. Mikey. Okay, guys, well, some people are joining here. It's good to do refreshers. I have recorded a lot of calls for you guys to listen to repeatedly, and I'm just assuming you guys are listening to them repeatedly, but I don't know that you are. And remember that discipleship is when you're repeating information and you're also quizzing the people and making sure that they understand these things that you're talking about. You're not just assuming they caught it all the first time. That's not discipleship. So one of the signs that the church has fallen away is that they don't do discipleship anymore. They don't have private teaching sessions. That's what the church used to be all about, is taking people aside and teaching them and asking them questions and letting them ask a lot of questions. So this is important, guys, that as Christians, whoever we're receiving instruction from, we ought to be asking them tons of questions. And that's how you know that you know it, and it's how we know that you know it. But somebody was jumping in here today and asking some basic questions, and I want to see if you guys know how to answer these basic questions about what we believe and why we believe what we believe. I want you guys to have that confidence. Most of you already do. Does everybody see my screen here? Yes.
Indeed.
Look at the questions he asked. This is a newcomer, and he asked this in the newcomer section. By the way, if anybody wants access to this text here, the newcomer vetting, just let me know. He says, I have some questions. Number one, and I'll zoom in a little bit so you guys might be able to see this better. His first question is, did the church fall into apostasy after 300 to 400 years? If yes, did the gates of Hades prevail against it? I'd like to ask you guys, do you know the answer to this question? Sometimes people ask us questions that are really, they're either not honest or they're just not asked very skillfully. And they're baiting us into saying something really extreme and really outlandish so that they can say, "Ha, you're crazy. We proved it." And you need to not jump into that trap. When somebody asks you a yes or no question that does not have a yes or no answer, there is a lot of nuance to it. Then just don't answer yes and no. But who can answer this question? Brian, what would you say in response to this? Did the church fall into apostasy after 300 to 400 years? What would your response be, if you're able to? And if you're not able, I'll ask somebody else. I'll ask Peyton if you can.
Have your way, Peyton.
Well, the answer is yes. Did the church fall into apostasy? That's when it definitely got a lot heavier. When the church merged with essentially the church merging with the empire and the state by allowing someone who's not a bishop to have their say. And then from there, you started having bishops getting appointed, not in the correct, I think, the ordination. They were not appropriate bishops.
Exactly.
And I don't fully remember the gates of Hades thing.
That's all right. We can go over it again tonight. But yes, you said it. The church definitely committed a very great sin by allowing an unbeliever. It doesn't matter if he calls himself a Christian, guys. He's not even baptized. I mean, how they're like, well, he was a catechumen. Oh, okay. We're going to let a catechumen come in here and arbitrate in the church's matters. There's a really cool document that you guys can read. I wonder if I have it. Actually, you know what? I can just Google it. It's called Council of Nicaea, Five Perspectives. There should be a document online here somewhere. Maybe I have it downloaded. It's a really cool document that has 5 different accounts of everything that transpired at the Council of Nicaea. It's really great. It's pretty long actually, and I believe it has Athanasius, Eusebius, Theodoret, Sozomen, and Socrates. It's 5 accounts. And it's really cool because they all complement each other. They all confirm everything that happened at the Council of Nicaea. And they say, here it is. Here, guys, I'm going to drop this document here in the chat, and you guys can look at this. I may have done it in the past, but it's good for you guys to download this little document. It's called Nicene Parallels. And I'll open it for you. Look at this. Isn't this cool? Look, you got 5 different accounts side by side. Eusebius, Socrates, Sozomen, Theodoret, and Athanasius. And they go over each topic. Why was the council convened? What was the resolution? It's just really nice. You go through each of them. Usually you'll have all 5 of them saying something, but they give some longer statements than others. More detail. But it's pretty cool. Pretty cool document. But they all say the first thing that happened at the first Council of Nicaea was they put up a big chair in the middle of this church where they had gotten together. And the first thing that happens is when Constantine sits down on his throne in the midst of 300 bishops, he brings this stack of letters. And he says, these are a bunch of letters that I received from you bishops. You bishops wrote me letters asking that I would punish your fellow bishops and excommunicate them, exile them, or depose them because they were teaching things contrary to the ancient faith. And he promptly had all those letters burned right in front of everybody. And he said, this is very immature. This is just ridiculous that you guys would ask me to do this. And he says, I want you to resolve this yourselves. You guys discuss it. Don't ask me to come in and start punishing bishops who are teaching something wrong, especially without even a council having taken place. So that should tell you guys, if they ever tell us, oh, you guys, you're so extreme to say the Council of Nicaea was some kind of deviation, and then on the other hand, they'll say, oh, our wonderful, pious, righteous, holy Constantine, he saved Christianity. Well, take it from him. He knew that what they were doing was hypocritical. It was not how Christians are supposed to act. It is not how mature, wise, old bishops are supposed to act, that they would be petitioning the government to just start punishing other bishops. So if they are saying that, listen, if all the accounts are confirming that things like this happen, this was literally the first order of business, is Constantine saying, you bishops are not acting like you're supposed to. Even I know that. As an outsider, I can see this is not Christian behavior. Well, then accept it that the church was starting to have serious problems at that time. This isn't some conspiracy theory. Okay, everybody understand that point? That's something I would point out to him if I were to give a more lengthy response to Justin here. He says, did the church fall into apostasy after 300, 400 years? And yes, they certainly committed a very huge sin by sitting down and going to law to a heathen. Do you guys know what the scriptures say about going to law in front of heathens?
Of course.
Here, let me show you. 1 Corinthians 6 and 5. Let me show you what Paul says about this. Paul says, dare any of you, having a matter against another, go to law before the unrighteous and not before the saints? Do you not know that the saints will judge the world? And if the world will be judged by you, are you unworthy to judge the smallest matters? Do you not know that we shall judge angels? How much more things that pertain to this life? If then you have judgments concerning things pertaining to this life, do you appoint those who are least esteemed by the church to judge? See, this is talking about going in front of heathens to have a judgment, to have a matter settled. And Paul is saying, do any of you dare do that if you have a matter against another, to go to law before the unrighteous? Guys, that is what those bishops did. They disobeyed this obvious command. The church fathers are so explicit about going to law. Do we have a section on our website? Yeah, lawsuits. Look at this, guys. And this is only a small amount of quotes that Berceau put together. But these are all so great. All the church fathers all agree on this, but even Berceau with his few quotes shows you that the early church was against this, the idea of ever going to heathen or secular magistrates to settle matters among each other, among Christians. Look at this. Here's Athenagoras. He says, these we hold in contempt, though to the generality they appear matters of great importance. For we have learned not only not to return blow for blow, nor to go to law with those who plunder and rob us, but to those who smite us on one side of the face, to offer the other side also, and to those who take away our coat, to give likewise our cloak. But when we have surrendered our property, they plot against our very bodies and souls, pouring upon us wholesale charges of crimes of which we are guiltless even in thought, but which belong to these idle praters themselves, and to the whole tribe of those who are like them. That was Athenagoras. And yeah, they say over and over again, we do not go to law. We definitely don't go to law, even against our enemies, how much less against our brothers, in front of heathen tribunals. So, in answer to anybody who says, you think the church fell into apostasy? Duh. They were doing things that had never been heard of before. Teaming up with the government, and not just teaming up with the government over some practical matter, but church matters. Matters that are so lofty, they're things that not even not even a baptized Christian should necessarily be admitted into discussing. It's something for the leadership to discuss. And yet they brought in an unbaptized pagan. And yes, he was a pagan. Sure, guys, we appreciate Constantine being so friendly. But you know what? What's that saying they say about, you know,
Keep your enemies close, but your
and yeah,
friends close,
your
but enemies closer.
keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Well, no, there's the other one I'm thinking about deceitful are the kisses. Oh, there's something like that. Yes, the enemy was giving.
Faithful, faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful.
Yes, these were some very deceitful kisses the church was receiving. You just seeing somebody be friendly should not be enough to convince you, oh, he's a good guy. Oh, if he's friendly, he must be good. You know how many times we've walked into churches and had people walk up to us and say, oh, we're just so glad you're here today. Welcome, welcome to our church. Guys, friendliness means nothing to God. In fact, there are some times where you're being friendly with somebody and God's furious you're being friendly instead of being stern. And Constantine was real friendly with the bishops, and the bishops were real friendly with Constantine. They should not have been. They were heaping praises on him instead of rebuking him.
They were heaping praises on to a priest of Mithra, essentially.
Yes, a priest, a practicing pagan priest. Yes, so there's so much to say about this. Ordinations is one thing. That's a very huge thing. It's one of the worst things that the church actually allowed Constantine, and then his son especially, to appoint bishops, and that he would command and threaten that these men, usually counts and eunuchs from his own court, his own imperial palace, he was demanding that they be appointed as bishops. And the Catholics and Orthodox to this day still recognize those men to be legitimate bishops, even though that breaks every
Even
canon of ordination.
yeah, I was gonna say because eunuchs they're not fit to be teachers, correct? If I'm remembering correctly,
Well, if somebody was,
because they
it's more just that they were imperial
the
officials.
pagan.
It's not just that, oh,
Okay,
if you were castrated, you can never be a teacher. It's more just the act of castrating yourself is a sin, and we're not allowed to do that. This is something different though. In the palace, people who were in the royal palace, especially who were very close to the king and allowed to go into his private chambers and such, those men were always required to be castrated because they would be around the king's wife and his concubines. That was the main reason. And they didn't want men being distracted by sexual pleasures. So in the palace, a lot of people were eunuchs. Yeah,
gotcha.
and like Daniel and his friends, they were all made eunuchs when they were brought into King Nebuchadnezzar's palace. That was typical. And remember Potiphar, guys, in Pharaoh's palace? He was the captain of the bodyguard. And yeah, Potiphar, who was the master of Joseph when he was sold into slavery, Potiphar was made a eunuch. And that's actually why his wife was chasing after Joseph, because her husband became a eunuch and he couldn't satisfy her anymore. So yeah, that incited her to lust after a young man. Yes,
That makes a whole lot more sense.
yes, and that you only see that explicitly in the Septuagint, by the way.
That's interesting. That's like the first time I've heard about that. That brings a lot more context to that passage now.
Yep, it sure does. But it says it explicitly in the Septuagint. So anyway, guys, you read about this in Athanasius' book, History of the Arians. where he says the church got together, and when they saw bishops, or when they saw men who were being appointed as bishops by Constantine's son, Constantius, they were saying, we're not going to recognize these ordinations as valid. In fact, they had a council in Rome where Athanasius and Hosius, who was the president of the Council of Nicaea previously, he presided over this other council. They all ruled together, these ordinations are not valid. In fact, why don't we just read it? Let's just do it since we're here. Why would I tell you when I could just read it to you? Let's see here. Let's see here. One second here. I mean, there's so many great quotes. It goes on and on and on. But I'll read them to you again, guys. Just some quick quotes here so that you can hear what the church had to say about emperors interfering in ordinations. Here's Hosius. This was the president of the Council of Nicaea. You can look this up online. This is what Athanasius himself says. It's so funny when you go online, they're like, he is the supposed president of the Council of Nicaea. So silly they would say president when the earliest accounts say for a fact he was. Why would anybody doubt it? I don't know. It's just, I guess they really don't like the authority of this man, this bishop, the oldest person at the Council of Nicaea. He was over 100 years old when he died. They're just like, this is way too much authority. He's the supposed president. Okay. Anyway, he's called the president because all the bishops there chose one person to be the main spokesperson for the council. And this man, since he was a confessor, he was someone who had been tortured. His body was all messed up, and he had been released after Constantine legalized Christianity. They said, this old man, this confessor, is going to be spokesperson. He's the oldest among us. So Hosius says this. He wrote a letter to Constantius, which is preserved by Athanasius. This is what he has to say about any emperor, not just bad emperors, any emperor interfering in ordinations. He says to Constantius, cease to use force, write no letters, send no counts. He says, but release those that have been banished, lest while you are contemplating or complaining of violence, they do but exercise greater violence. And he's talking about how some of the Christian laity had risen up and gotten angry and actually attacked the messengers who were sent to take away their bishops. So, yeah, the laity was also acting up, and they were being violent. So he's saying, yeah, if you're worried about violence from the laity, just be concerned. There could be even more violence. And then he says, when was any such thing done by Constans? That's Constantius' brother. He said, what bishop suffered banishment? When did he appear as an arbiter of an ecclesiastical trial? When did any palatine of his compel men to subscribe against anyone, that Valens and his fellows should be able to confirm this, or to affirm this? He says, cease these proceedings, I beseech you, and remember that you are a mortal man. Be afraid of the day of judgment, and keep yourself pure thereunto. Intrude not yourself into ecclesiastical matters, neither give commands unto us concerning them. Wow, guys, this is quite a statement. Do you realize the Catholics and Orthodox believe a council is only ecumenical? It's only inspired by God if an emperor convenes it. Did you guys know that? They say it's not only permitted for an emperor to intrude, but essential. It's a requirement. And yet, what is Hosius saying? Intrude not yourself into ecclesiastical matters. They're like, well, he has to. That's the only way Christianity can exist, is if the emperor intrudes. He says, neither give commands unto us concerning them, but learn them from us. God has put into your hands the kingdom. To us he has entrusted the affairs of his church. And as he who would steal the empire from you would resist the ordinance of God, so likewise fear on your part, lest by taking upon yourself the government of the church, you become guilty of a great offense. It is written, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. Neither therefore is it permitted unto us to exercise an earthly rule. Wow, guys, you see that? Bishops can't have anything to do with earthly rule, nor can Christians. He says, nor have you, sire, any authority to burn incense. Now, somebody may think he is talking about literal incense. He's not. He's actually referring to a story in Chronicles that talks about the king, Uzziah, coming into the temple, and he has incense, and he tells the priests, I am going to burn incense in the temple. And the priests say, it is not for you, O king, to burn incense. It's only for the priests. So he is hearkening back to that. He's saying, you are being like King Uzziah, who barged into the church, and you want to exercise priestly functions. So just so you guys know, he's not talking about literal incense, because they all condemn burning literal incense. But listen to what he says. He says, "Who that witnessed these things, or that has merely heard of them, will not be greatly amazed and cry aloud unto the Lord, saying, Will you make a full end of Israel?" So he's quoting Ezekiel, guys. Remember when Ezekiel is speaking to God and he sees God's judgment on Israel, and it seems to Ezekiel that Israel is going to be completely destroyed by God in God's wrath. And he asks God, "Well, God, are you intending just to completely destroy Israel, or will you make a full end of Israel?" I think even we ask the same thing. If we were living back then, we would say that. We'd say, "Look at what is happening to the church. God, are you making a full end of your church?" You don't see any Cathodox talking about this, but they're quoting the same passages in the Old Testament talking about Israel coming to an end or being judged by God for falling away from him. They're connecting those passages in the Old Testament about Israel to the New Testament church. Anyway, he says, "Who that is acquainted with these proceedings will not with good reason cry aloud and say, A wonderful and horrible thing is done in the land. And the heavens are astonished at this, and the earth is even more horribly afraid. The fathers of the people and the teachers of the faith are taken away, and the impious are brought into the churches." Yes, there's much to say about this. Yes, he says it's a prelude to the coming of Antichrist, with whom Constantius is thus preparing the way. So much to say, so much to say. Oh, he says, "One Heraclius, by rank a count, was the bearer of this letter, and the precursor of a certain George, that was dispatched by the emperor as a spy. For one that was sent from him cannot be a bishop. God forbid." Wow, what a thing to say. But of course, tons and tons of bishops were ordained, and they were done at the behest of Constantius. And yet the Catholics and Orthodox say, "Oh no, those are bishops, and we derive apostolic succession." Okay, we're going to jump back to the question. I know we're saying a lot, guys, but I'm just showing you there's so much material. Jump on this article called Apostasy, which we have on the website, where we have so many scriptures on the subject, so many church father quotes, just tons and tons. And we even highlighted the red bits, which are like really good parts, stuff that's very important for context, and then the little purple bits, which are just killer quotes, showing there really was an apostasy and that they believe that. Okay, so the answer to this guy is the leaders were totally losing their minds by allowing an emperor to interfere in the church. This is something they are all talking about. We are not weird conspiracy theorists for saying, "Oh, this church was, paving the way for the Antichrist." That's what their own bishops are saying. It's what Athanasius is saying, and Hosius. Remember, Athanasius is quoting Hosius. And Athanasius is seen by the Cathodox to be this great defender of the Orthodox faith. They have this saying that they love to ascribe, well, they love to attach it to Athanasius. They say, "Athanasius against the world." They say, that's right, Athanasius was one of the only bishops, really the main one, who stood up to the empire and even stood up to all the other bishops to defend the ancient faith. Well, how can they say that without acknowledging that Athanasius really was opposing the whole apostate church? Okay, so our answer is, even though the church didn't deny every single doctrine, they still affirmed virtually every doctrine of the faith. On this important doctrine, they did apostatize. And God is the judge. He will decide whether they lose their salvation for letting an emperor come in and interfere. But I would hope for their sake that they could still be saved, because everybody who did it, Athanasius included, and Hosius included, everyone who allowed the emperor to interfere in the church was later banished. They were banished by Constantius, and even Constantine. Like Athanasius was banished by Constantine himself, and then by his son Constantius, when these emperors decided that they endorsed Arianism. And so these bishops were realizing, they may not say it explicitly, but I sure get the feeling, guys, with Hosius and Athanasius, that they are realizing what a bad idea it was to involve the emperor. That's the feeling I get. I don't know for certain, but man, oh man, when you read what they're saying, how much disdain they have for an emperor interfering in the church's affairs, and yet you know that they previously did it. It just sounds like they are repenting, and they're saying, this is wrong. We thought it was a good idea at first to have the emperor be present, but now we can see this just leads to disaster. But that's just my 2 cents, guys. That's the impression I get from reading Hosius and Athanasius and Hilary and others. And again,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead,
Also,
Raheem.
I think we could maybe we could use the argument of like dogmas, because I know the Catholic and the Orthodox Church, they believe that the councils, they determine the doctrines of the church, and they also believe that an emperor has to convene the councils. So we could easily prove from numerous quotes that, well, before that, the church actually had had dogma without any emperors. In fact, they actually condemned the church mingling with the state. That's
Yes, they sure did. Isn't that a crazy thing that they want to make it sound like all dogmas of the church come from councils, and we should always respond, wow, so there were no dogmas in the church for 300 years? They don't even know the
yeah,
definition of a dogma. A dogma is just a rule. It's a rule that the church lays down and that they don't budge on. They're firm about it, and they'll excommunicate you if you don't agree to these things and practice them. So if you can simply show that the church did excommunicate people for 300 years over various issues, well, then of course they had dogmas. Oh, we're going to excommunicate you over it, but we're not dogmatic about it. I mean, give me a break. Anything that you're excommunicated over, anything that is a requirement for you to believe before you're even baptized, is absolutely a dogma of the church. But they're taking these words and trying to redefine them, and boy, do they love to confuse people. Just don't get caught up into it, guys. Don't get swept away by their confusing words, or like Paul says to Timothy, their novelties of words. Don't they just love to change the definitions of words and to say, well, that may be something that the church fathers say, but we understand that differently, and their definition of is different than our definition of that word. Like dulia with iconodulia. We know that in Greek the word dulia means slave, so to them we would be icon slaves, but we've changed the definition of dulia to just mean respect. We have respect for icons. We're not slaves. They think they can change words, but don't buy into it, guys. They don't get to change definitions
Right.
of words. All these words have such simple definitions. All of them do. It's just like with Protestants and the word justified. They have created this whole definition of what it means to be justified. It is so simple. To be just means to be righteous. They're like, no. We need to get in all this technical stuff. It's when you're very wicked, but then God pastes a picture of Jesus on you, and then He always sees Jesus when He looks at you, and no matter how many sins you commit, you're justified. Huh? No, justified just means you're righteous. It says those He sanctified, He also justified. So yes, God sanctifies us. He cleanses us of our sins. He teaches us how to be righteous, and He justifies us. That is, He makes us righteous.
Sometimes things are a lot simpler than people try to make out.
Yes, so true. Very true, Peyton. Okay, I'm only on the first question this guy asked, and he even did follow-up questions. I wonder if I'll get to him tonight, but look, I'll try to knock it out here. Forgive me, guys. That's how it always is. So, just one more time, I'm going to confirm, guys. I would answer this question with some nuance. On the one hand, the church did fall into apostasy, but we're not so crazy that we're going to say, oh, all the bishops denied the entire faith and they just reversed on every doctrine. None of us are saying that. In
I could
fact,
tell that's what he was getting at.
right. He's going to make it sound like we are just saying the super intense, absurd thing. But even they would admit that during the Arian controversy, which happened right after here, the church fell into apostasy. So they are just trying to make us sound crazy when we're not. We are not crazy. We're saying things that even they agree with. Now here's the irony: we actually agree with the post-Nicene fathers like Athanasius and John Chrysostom and Ambrose and Basil and Gregory and all of them. We agree with them more than the Cathodox agree with them. The Cathodox would say that they are wrong on a massive number of doctrines. They would say they're all wrong about image veneration, which is really image slavery. They would say all the church fathers are wrong about what they say about God forbidding us to offer incense to Him anymore, let alone incense to images. They would say that all the church fathers are wrong when they say Mary committed sins. They would say that all the church fathers are wrong about marriage and divorce, which they were pretty unanimous about, even in the 300s. They would say all the church fathers are wrong about women veiling and a whole host of other issues. They would say they're all wrong about that. And guys, I guarantee you, if the Cathodox were here, those church fathers in the 300s and 400s and 500s would all excommunicate the Cathodox. They would. But they would not excommunicate us. They would not excommunicate us, guys. On the contrary, we'd be rebuking them about war, and they'd be saying things like Basil says, like, well, we know that we shouldn't be going to war, and we will do an excommunication of anybody who goes to war, but sometimes you just have to, guys. Sometimes you can't help it. And they'd make lousy excuses like that when they're trying to go along with war. But they weren't really hard against anybody. They weren't attacking anybody who said no, war is evil. They knew it. They were excommunicating people. So even on the things they were compromising on, they knew that they were not in the right. They couldn't claim some apostolic authority to teach those things. No, we would have much more in common with those post-Nicene fathers. And I think they would accept us. I don't know if they would accept our rebuke about them joining with the government, but they would on pretty much every other issue. That's their main heresy right there. It's pretty much just one. And with that comes the allowance of war. Okay, let's go on to the next question. Our answer to this one is yes, there's some nuance to it. They did fall into apostasy on joining the government, but they still would agree with us way more than the Cathodox. Okay, question number 2. He says, you say you follow only the pre-Nicene fathers, but even they disagree sometimes. So who decides what is unanimous? Well, he would have to give an example on something they disagree with. Next question. You can't just say that, guys. If anybody ever does this with you, just don't play the game. Say, tell me what they disagree with. So that's what I did. I just said, tell me what they disagree with. Okay, we're going to go on the next question. Did your group exist after the church fell? I mean, did righteous people still exist? What would you say? What's a good response? How many of you guys are able to answer? I just want to quiz you guys and just see what your response would be. Are you able to answer?
Can you read the question again?
The question is, look, and you can see he's not even asking seriously, but still we need to know what to say to people who would say something like this. He says, did your group exist after the church fell? I mean, did righteous people still exist?
I would say yeah. I would say righteous people did exist, and then if he asked me like how would I know that, I'd like bring up the I forgot where it is, uh the story of Elijah, where God kept a remnant of people that still believed even after everybody like disobeyed him.
That would be a good example. There are many more like it. We could make a
I
long
also
list.
think that there were specific like pockets like of small groups throughout history who held on to the true faith. It's just that most of the time they end up getting persecuted, or as time got later on and the Cathodox kind of took over the world for 500 to 1,000 years, they just started getting executed.
Yes, the numbers have gotten smaller, but maybe in some ways they've actually gotten larger just because human population is so huge. I do believe every single aborted baby is going to heaven, so that's pretty cool. A lot of people are being saved. A lot of millions of people are going to heaven. That's great. In fact, guys, we may find on Judgment Day that the vast majority of all human beings who will live with God for eternity as his children will just be murdered babies. Isn't that a crazy statistic to think about? There will be people who are rejected by earthlings, rejected by human parents. But yes, I agree with you, Mikey. Good answer. And even Athanasius says this when the emperors are taking over and replacing the legitimate bishops with fake ones. He says, where is there a church which now enjoys the privilege of worshiping Christ freely? If a church be a maintainer of true piety, it is in danger. Or if it takes a while to agree with the emperor, it abides in fear. Every place is full of hypocrisy and impiety. Listen to that. Every place is full of hypocrisy and impiety so far as he is concerned. And wherever there is a pious person, remember guys, pious just means a religious person, a person who loves God. Wherever there is a pious person and a lover of Christ, and there are many such everywhere, as were the prophets and the great Elijah, they hide themselves. And either they withdraw into caves and dens of the earth, or they pass their lives in wandering about in the deserts. That's what Athanasius says. So somebody might say, well, how are you a Christian if you're not obeying a bishop? Where's your bishop? Well, guys, what did the Christians do when the church fell away during this 40-year period of apostasy? Most of these people didn't have bishops to submit to. Are they just doomed? Well, of course not. They're still going to be saved. We're only required to obey righteous bishops. We're never told to obey bishops unconditionally. That is not a doctrine of the church. I tell you, these people have a very submissive attitude. Nolan would say this. They have a perfect attitude about submission. That's good to have. But they are such bootlickers. We are not so submissive that we just blindly obey. We are supposed to be totally submissive to righteous bishops, but not blindly submissive. That's insanity. That's not a virtue. I'm just going to obey him no matter how evil it is, and I think God loves that about me. You can just be the most wicked, despicable person, and I'll always serve you. I'll always defend you. That's a virtue? That's not Christianity. Unbelievable, though. Good response, though, Mikey. Good response. And of course, people have been saved throughout the centuries. But we're also not the judges. They always want to say, well, how many people were saved during that time or something like that? Where's the group? This is a great response to say to them, guys, you guys tell me, you Cathodox, tell me where your group is in any of these centuries. Do you agree with all of Athanasius' teachings? No? You don't like what he says about Mary committing sins, or him bashing icon veneration, or him bashing offering incense to God, or him bashing the idea of involving emperors in the church? You don't agree with any of that. Okay. Who do you have? Name one person in the 300s or 400s who shared all of the Cathodox doctrines. Guys, they won't be able to name one person. Not even one person. Out of hundreds. There are hundreds of bishops between the year 300 and 400. And especially hundreds between 300 and 500. So they're making it sound like we've got the problem. They're like, where's your group? No, you Cathodox. Where's your group? Your church didn't exist. What they believe is much closer to what we believe. So of course we think it's possible that many of those people are being saved. Remember that we're saying the bishops, the leadership, had their ordinations destroyed. But they can still save people by teaching the true doctrines, even if their ordinations are not correct. Just like an apologist like Justin Martyr could save people with his teaching, even if he is not ordained. Of course, nobody has to obey him if he's not ordained, but still, he could save people by teaching them the true faith, just like we could right now. So we're sure people were being saved. This idea of us needing to trace our beliefs back to a singular group that was surviving during this time is a silly idea because they fail at their own requirement. Okay, next question. He says, how do you take the Eucharist? And how are you baptized? And stuff like that. Well, we baptize each other because the early church and others believe that the righteousness, the correct beliefs of the baptizer are the main thing that's necessary. And so we are in a situation where we have no choice. They'll say, well, what are you going to do? You need a real priest. Well, we would show them that there is no priest for us to be baptized by. Remember, the apostolic succession is not just a line of correct ordinations done properly, but it's also the original beliefs. They don't have apostolic succession. We have no choice but to baptize. And the church did allow emergency baptisms like that when there was no bishop available. Yes, Raheem?
I was gonna say two things. Maybe I should write them down, but I guess wasn't apostolic succession like the main point of it was to um maintain and to keep the original doctrines that was handed down.
Yes.
As I said, the succession of the apostolic faith, right?
That's the main part of
Uh,
apostolic succession, and they ignore that.
so they want us to submit to heretical bishops while claiming to have apostolic succession.
Yes.
What are they preserving?
So true. What are they preserving? And see, we have stories from the early church. We even have it from books like 3rd John, because in 3rd John, John replaces a heretical bishop. I'm sure he had a correct ordination. There have been plenty of bishops that had a correct ordination. But your correct ordination means nothing if you become a heretic. It means nothing. If you turn into a heretic and you will not receive correction from the other bishops who come to rebuke you, and you're deposed, It doesn't matter that you ever had a correct ordination. Even if you're not deposed, it means nothing. The people have to flee from you. They put all this emphasis on the ordination rather than on the correct doctrine. That's very, very astute of you to point out, Raheem.
Is it only correct doctrine, or somehow does someone have to also have the discipline? Because I know Tertullian talks about that, and I think I found that one quote from Origin talking about the same thing
Mm-hmm.
that I shared with you a while ago.
Yes,
But
amazing quotes.
in terms of baptizing people, like, so it's just having the correct beliefs, but uh, like I'm wondering if like that person has have everything figured out with like their life in terms of like righteousness and stuff, like the discipline of a priest, or
I'm just talking about apostolic succession of bishops. The main part of it is preserving the correct doctrine.
oh, I'm sorry. I got caught up with thinking that you're talking about the baptism, and never mind.
Yes, no, but
I was talking about the baptism and the Eucharist stuff. I apologize.
no, but you're making a good point as well. There's that too. But the point is, the whole reason of having a bishop, guys, is so that you'll have a good guide, a good shepherd who will teach you the correct doctrine. Do you see how totally backwards and counterproductive it is for them to say, well, the emperor may, or the bishop may be a heretic, he may be teaching things wrong, but you have to obey him because he's God's bishop. Wait a second. What's the purpose of a bishop? It's to teach you the correct doctrines. I see. And you acknowledge he is a heretic? Yeah, he's a heretic, but you have to obey him. So he basically is performing no function whatsoever except to destroy your soul by teaching lies. Yes, but God wants you to obey him. I see. So God wants me to kill myself? Is that right? Yes, God wants you to kill yourself. I see.
The more I think about it, it just becomes like more stupid because we know that there have been cases in history where, as you said, like even in the Bible, it's mentioned. I think it was Paul who deposed that bishop, right? What did you expect that church to do? You think they were going to submit to those heretical teachings? No. No. I
Of course
mean,
not. The church is filled with stories like that of a bishop who had to be excommunicated and replaced. And the people were wise to send letters to the other bishops and say, hey, we've got a rogue bishop acting crazy. There's this one famous one called Paul of Samosata. I mean, guys, this guy was crazy. Eusebius has a lengthy section in his church history about Paul of Samosata. He's in Antioch. He's the bishop there, and he did just, I mean, you can't even remember all the crazy things he did. He denied Christ's divinity openly. He was rich. He had consorts. He had these women following him around all the time, everywhere he went. He had hymns written that were dedicated to himself, and he had the congregations sing hymns to him on Sundays. He was also a he was even a Roman official. Like his whole ordination, everything was so messed up, so sick, and the people had a real problem with him and called other bishops, please help us out. This guy is an evil guy. He's got to be replaced. So they had a council and they got rid of Paul of Samosata. But just incredible, guys, that anybody would suggest you have to obey a bishop no matter what. When history bears out that all of the laity who opposed evil bishops were always commended. They were complimented for their strength. And it's even more insane when you realize even the Cathodox themselves see this as a great virtue when one man refuses to go along with evil teachers or even a council of evil bishops. Have you guys ever heard of Mark the Confessor or Maximus the Confessor? They have these saints guys, the Catholics and Orthodox do, and they'll say, these men are so great because they, at separate times, they were called to councils, and these men would be the only people at an entire council of hundreds of bishops who would say, no, we think you guys are all wrong on whatever issue. And then the Catholics and Orthodox will say, he's so epic. Yes, Mark the Confessor. Yes, so epic because he refused to go along with these evil guys. And they say, wait a second.
well, they derived their succession from those evil guys.
Yeah. They have to still say, well, they're all legitimate, to some degree. Yes, but they have these guys. I mean, they even say here. Let me see here. Was it Maximus? Hand was cut off at council. This kind of thing happened multiple times.
Yeah, it was Maximus.
It's
They
Maximus,
cut
isn't
out
it?
his hand and they
And
cut
his
out his
tongue.
tongue.
That's right, because he refused to go along with them when they said you're wrong in your doctrine, and so they said, we're going to cut off his hand so that he cannot write down these lies, and we're going to chop out his tongue so he can't teach it anymore. And now the Catholics and Orthodox say he was right to oppose the entire council that had convened, that he was present at. He was the only person opposing it. Maximus lived in the 500s and 600s. Yeah, what a joke. Anyway, I'm just giving you guys some information here to go with. I mean, they will always make it sound like we're on the fringe here. How do you have baptism? How do you have the Eucharist? Well, we have it apart from evil priests. What we would say is that you guys who are asking this question are in the exact same boat we're in. You don't have any legitimate priests to receive these things from. So you got a choice. You can either refuse, you just refrain from having these essential sacraments, or you can take them in this emergency scenario that normally would not be lawful if you had a bishop present. But you have to understand the reason why it's not lawful to baptize somebody when you have a bishop is because it's totally disorderly and rebellious. That bishop has a responsibility to vet every person who's coming into the faith. Along with his elders, they're supposed to instruct them carefully and then baptize them when they are fully instructed. But you are going behind his back and you're baptizing people instead of initiating them, instead of properly inducting them into the congregation. That is rebellious. That is disorderly. And even the church would consider it to be a legitimate baptism, but they would say what you're doing is wrong. So you understand how something can be unlawful, guys, and yet it can still take effect. That would be unlawful for me to go baptize people if my bishop is there in the city. I'm doing it behind his back. But guys, we don't have a bishop. We are not acting disorderly. We're doing what's necessary. And we're still...
And
Oh, go ahead.
no, you can go ahead.
Well, I was going to say we still warn all of you about baptizing and having the Eucharist in an unworthy manner. You should be terrified. If we haven't struck terror in you about it, then allow us to do so. We'll make another video about the Eucharist. Our first one hopefully was sufficient, but we'll make another. You should not have the Eucharist if you are practicing sin and if you are not really in full understanding of what that sacrament is. We take these things more seriously than the Cathodox do. The Cathodox allow people who practice sin, who practice fornication, to have the Eucharist. I observed it in the only Orthodox church that was anywhere near my town. My dad and I spoke to that priest. And later on, I spoke to the priest myself. And he admitted that they did allow fornicators to be in the church and have communion. And he said, I'd rather they be here than out there. As if that was such a lovely thing, to taint the church rather than let the tainters stay outside of the church. I'd rather they taint us, I'd rather they pollute us than be out there in the world where they belong. Yeah.
Well, rather the murderers come in than they stay out.
Yes, I'd rather we be just as corrupt and wicked as possible so that I can get my monthly donations from these people. And that's really what it is about, getting the money. So anyway,
Yeah.
Justin is not aware that in emergencies we would baptize and take the Eucharist, and that there is a precedent for that in church history. And number
Real
5.
quick.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to mention like what Tertullian says about in the case of necessity, like
Yes.
even the laity.
There
Yeah,
are a
they-
lot of quotes on this subject, but the oldest one we have is from Tertullian. Well, also Clement of Alexandria. We can just read Tertullian's though. He says this. Tertullian says, "Are not even we laics," that just means people who are not in leadership in the church, are not even we laics priests? It is written, a kingdom also, and priests to his God and Father has he made us. It is the authority of the church and the honor which has acquired sanctity through the joint session of the order, which has established the difference between the order and the laity. Accordingly, where there is no joint session of the ecclesiastical order, you offer the Eucharist and baptize and are priest alone for yourself. But where three are, a church is, albeit they be laics. For each individual lives by his own faith, nor is there exception of persons with God, since it is not the hearers of the law who are justified by the Lord, but the doers, according to what the apostle withal says. God wills us all to be so conditioned as to be ready at all times and places to undertake the duties of his sacraments. And
Mm-hmm.
there are other church fathers that say it. Yes, good idea, Raheem, to actually read it.
Luke, I'm not sure if you have this one, but he also mentions it again in his book on baptism in chapter 17. He says, I mean, if you want to read it on screen,
Sure.
but chapter 17.
All right. He says, for concluding, you want me to read this whole thing?
Uh, down to where he says, in like manner, too, baptism, which is equally God's property, can be administered by all.
Hmm.
So just keep,
In like
yeah,
manner
or
to
you can, yeah.
in like manner to baptism, which is equally God's property, can be administered by all. But how much more is the rule of reverence and modesty incumbent on laymen, seeing that these powers belong to their superiors, lest they assume to themselves the specific function of the bishop. See, guys, it goes both ways. On the one hand, he says it is something that they can administer, but that is totally shameless. That's the word he's probably using for modesty and immodesty. He's saying that would just be shameless for you to go and do that against or without the knowledge of your bishop. So it's both guys. Tertullian's not some crazy person going out there saying, yeah, laity, you can baptize. Everybody baptize whenever you want. He's not doing that. He is saying, while you do have that power, you should only be doing it in emergencies. And that's what all of them would say.
But he also, right, he also says, um, okay, I'll just read the beginning part. For concluding our brief subject, it remains to put you in mind also of the due observance of giving and receiving baptism. Of giving it, the chief priest, who is the bishop, has the right. In the next place, the presbyters and deacons, yet not without the bishop's authority on account of the honor of the church, which being preserved, peace is preserved. Beside these, even laymen have the right, for what is equally received can be equally given, unless bishops or priests or deacons be on the spot, other disciples are called to the work. The
Good.
word of the Lord ought not to be hidden by any. And then that's where what you read. In like manner, too, baptism, which is equally God's property, can be administered by all. And then
Mm-hmm.
so on and so forth.
Yes,
Tertullian is very wise. You said Clement talks about it. I haven't read Clement, so
I
I
can show
mean,
it to
could
you.
you read that, please?
Yeah, you got to keep up with Brian. He's always posting such great quotes. But it reminds me of John Chrysostom because he was saying it's ultimately something that belongs to God. He said, which is, baptism is God's property. But
You can save it.
yeah, I will. I will save it right now. John Chrysostom also says, for this reason, when the priest is baptizing, he does not say, I baptize so and so, but he says, so and so is baptized in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. In this way, he shows that it is not he who baptizes, but those whose names have been invoked, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. But they would make it sound like, I, the bishop, with all my power, baptize you. No. Remember, it's
Yeah,
faith.
it's like a
It's faith in the working of
they,
God.
they see it as this very like mechanical thing, like only like I think some Orthodox might be more strong on this than certain Catholics. It depends. Like they'll accept baptisms from other churches, but they have this like only the bishop can properly do this sacrament. You must have the bishop in order to do the sacrament, as if like and like the succession is this like oh like they have proper succession because they like receive some mechanical thing, but like it's all about this like this line of one guy ordaining the next guy more so than having proper doctrine. And likewise with the sacrament, it's all about the bishop doing the sacrament rather than like the way the sacrament is done. So this view makes sense with it's about preserving the integrity and the honor of the church. I think right the Tertullian said, but
Yes.
that doesn't mean that a lay person that baptizes it's an invalid baptism. Of course not.
Yep. And there are many other stories in here as well in this apostasy section where we go over many instances, even children doing baptisms. But for the
Yeah,
sake of
Athanasius, right?
yes, but for the sake of order in the church and preserving the dignity of our bishop, if we had a bishop, we would never do it without his permission. So both of those things are true. They'll always point to this quote from Ignatius where he says it's not lawful to go and baptize without the bishop. And they'll say, "Ha, see?" But wait a second, guys. It's not just that it's unlawful to offer the Eucharist without the bishop, it's also unlawful to baptize without the bishop. And yet their church recognizes baptisms done by the laity to be legitimate, even if unlawfully done. Something can be unlawful and still have its effect at the same time. Yep. They also will point to this too, where they say, make sure, listen to this from Ignatius, it is not lawful without the bishop either to baptize or to celebrate a love feast, but whatsoever he shall approve of, that is also pleasing to God, so that everything that is done may be secure and valid. So he is using the word valid here. Makes it sound like if the bishop isn't doing it, it's going to be invalid. But guys, understand why a bishop is there. The bishop makes sure that everything is being done correctly. Now, somebody who's not a bishop could do it correctly, but that's very dangerous to have an uneducated person baptizing or celebrating the Eucharist. That is very dangerous. It's not that he's incapable of doing it. It's just that, for the sake of good order and for safety, you have the bishop do these things so that they may be done securely and validly. But they would say, "Oh no, it's all just his authority that makes it valid." If that were true, guys, that his authority alone is what makes it valid, well then you wouldn't have all the church fathers in these long lists of quotes, pre-Nicene and post-Nicene, saying that an unrighteous bishop's Eucharist is rejected by God. That proves the ordination is not what makes it valid. It's the righteousness of the person doing it and their understanding of what they're doing. They're doing it with knowledge, and they're doing it in true faith. Look at, I have so many post-Nicene fathers here in this list, but let me see here. Let me give you some. Listen to what Jerome says. He says, God hates the sacrifices of these heretical priests and pushes them away from himself. And whenever they come together in the name of the Lord, he abhors their stench and holds his nose. So guys, ordination does not make their sacrifice acceptable. Righteousness is what makes the Eucharist acceptable. And what makes baptism correct is that the act is done in faith and it's done properly, the way Christ mandated.
When they say lawful, what exactly do they mean? From, from the Ignatius quote.
With the Ignatius quote, it's talking about the rules that God has set up, that the laity would
Mhm.
submit to the bishop.
Oh yes, like structure.
Yes.
Yeah, like the issue would be, I guess, stubbornness or not submitting to valid authorities. If someone were to baptize apart from the bishop where there is a legitimate bishop around, that would be their issue.
Right.
But that,
What they're
but again, it would
suggesting is so absurd. If you're to use the analogy of parents and children, of course children would not go and mess with, newborn infants and things apart from their parents' consent. They would not go and do that against Mother Church or Father Christ. They wouldn't do that. They leave it up to their mother. Mom's in charge. She's got control of the newborns. But guys, if mom isn't there, the children are not in trouble for taking care of the newborns and doing the things that mom would have done if she was present. In fact, they are blessed for it. They deserve great acclaim and admiration for taking care of them when mom isn't there. And that's what we are doing. because mom is not there. Mom is adulterous. Mom is not here taking care of the children. So we do those things that she would have done.
Right. Um, and I also thought of an argument, so I want to hear what you think about it. Right. I know the thing with the Cathodox, it's about the authority of apostolic succession. It's not really about I guess it's not really about the teachings or the doctrines. It's just about the authority. So they would have to admit that bishops have been excommunicated in the past for having wrong doctrine and these things. But if their thing is just the authority, and even if they're a heretical bishop, they still retain that authority. So even if they're excommunicated, that in their view, wouldn't they still have that authority? Because I guess it's just the teaching.
Yes, but they're lacking in every way, not just the teaching, but even a valid ordination. And God worked it out that
Yeah.
way. He let them reach that level of corruption so that we would not be in any doubt as to whether we were supposed to submit to them. But I'm sorry if anybody thinks to themselves, I'm going to go and be baptized with the Orthodox or the Catholics. I'm going to go have the Eucharist with them because at least they've got proper ordinations, even if they are teaching heresy. You'd be wrong on both accounts. They neither have the doctrine nor do they have even legitimate ordinations. They have nothing. You are not getting a better baptism or a better Eucharist by going to them. You're getting something worse, something very corrupt, very evil that God hates, and He expects you to flee from it. Okay, we'll go to question number 5. Doesn't this take a long time? See, he needs this. What people need is instruction. They don't need short little responses like I gave him. If I gave him a long one, he wouldn't even read it, and he wouldn't understand it, and it would only make more questions. Everything has to be taught in an orderly way. People need discipleship, not just these responses. And that's why we encourage them to get in a call with us. Okay, question number 5. He says, what makes your private interpretation of the early church texts more valid than 2,000 years of continuous church tradition? Isn't the church the one that preserved the texts of the church fathers? There's a lot to unpack here. What would you say, guys? What would you guys say in response to this? Nice to see you again, Stephen. If you do want to jump in, Stephen, you can. Or Ben, or any of the newcomers. He's asking, what makes your private interpretation of the early church text more valid than the church's continuous tradition? Well, the church doesn't have the continuous tradition. Their traditions have changed. Also, I give him a very brief response here. I just said, if you believe we've misinterpreted the early church's teachings on any issue, please name that for us. See, that should always be our response. We may be tempted to say much more, but I would just say, okay, prove that we have misinterpreted that. Show us where your church teaches something different, and let's see if they acknowledge these quotes that we brought forward. So what you're going to find, guys, is the Cathodox amazingly acknowledge so many of the things we're saying. They acknowledge that the Ante-Nicene fathers totally contradict them on a whole plethora of issues. And they'll say, well, the church has the authority to override those mistaken church fathers. So they'll ask this question as if we were ignorant. What makes you think that your interpretation is correct instead of the church's interpretation of the fathers? No, we didn't come up with a different interpretation. When you've got hundreds of quotes like we do, you can't really misunderstand them. You should see these people just desperate to find any quote in favor of what they believe. See, guys, we're not desperate. I was like if you look up early church fathers in support of icons, you will find like 3 or 4 and virtually nothing from the Ante-Nicene Church. And what you do find will just be the lamest, most pathetic attempt at taking a quote out of context to twist it to say what you're saying. Guys, we don't have that problem. Have you ever noticed? Whenever we collect quotes on subjects, we have hundreds. We have so many, it would take 10 hours to read them all. Pick any subject. Well, that's the way it's supposed to be. If you want to prove Christ's divinity to somebody, you say, let me show you what the Fathers say. You've got so many quotes on the subject, their jaw drops to the floor. They're going, oh my goodness, okay, it's too many. You're blowing me away. I get it, it's too many. That's how it should be, and that's how it is with every true doctrine. You've got so many scriptures and so many fathers talking about it, it'll blow your socks off. And what do they have when it comes to their doctrines? Mary worship, icon veneration? Give me a break. They have the lousiest quotes. They are desperate. In fact, their quotes that they bring forward are actually the most convincing evidence that they are desperate and that they are lying. Because the kind of proof that they bring for those things is so different from the kind of evidence you would bring to prove something like baptismal regeneration or the doctrine of faith and works or any of these essential doctrines. On the one hand, you got millions of quotes on baptism, and then you say, "Show me, Mary's sinlessness. Give me some quotes." And they're like, "Well, like you can maybe kind of stretch this quote here out of context, maybe." Total contrast.
Here's some chat GPT quotes.
Yes, they'll have to give you ChatGPT. Well, they do that these days. We've encountered a new kind
I
of pain.
I think about like how does a few ambiguous quotes on any specific like if they want to look for quotes on Mary's sinlessness or on images, it's like you're saying it's so ambiguous and they're gonna strain at a gnat to find it. They're gonna like try so hard to squeeze it to to stretch it. But then like the other side of this, so Mary committed sins and no images or icons, no becoming Muslims and smooching it. Um, you can find tons of evidence for that easily by just reading normally. But then when you go to read or when you go to look for quotes for Mary's sinlessness or uh, icons, it's like you barely find it. You're gonna try so hard, and I think to actually find it, you have to look it up on Google to somehow find some ambiguous quote because you're not gonna find it just reading like normally.
Exactly. But the true doctrines of the faith you'll find repeated over and over again, even just by the same church father. Not even just, oh, I found one quote from one church father and one quote from another. Oh, no, the same church father will talk about it many times.
I Yeah, I also one thing I wanted to say that as well. I guess you already touched on it. I just wanted to say that I also know that it's not really a private interpretation, like the things that you may tell us, or what you and or what Nolan says, or what Christian, right? I know that it's not exactly just your guys' interpretation of things, and we're just running with it because you guys also want us to read the church fathers, and like you don't discourage us from doing so. If you had your own private interpretation, you'd be scared of us going out and reading ourselves. But just the idea that we read on our own, we study on our own, and you guys aren't just feeding us like spoon feeding every little thing, then kind of just shows that like and if we do that and still come to the same conclusions, then like what really is it really a private interpretation? Because like because there's been I mean you guys have said a lot of things to us, and then like I might be skeptical about it at first or not really sure about it, but then I'll do some reading and I'll just find the evidence myself. I'll read and then perhaps I'll find some verses for it and I'll be reading the fathers and I'll also find more stuff about it. Uh, just kind of showing me that you guys aren't just making it up, but that there is evidence for it. And I'm not even trying to find it. I just find it in reading normally. So it's like if someone wants to say it's a private interpretation, then why am how am I still finding things that kind of line up with it, if that makes sense?
Yes, it's so encouraging to hear you say that, Brian. And I've heard multiple of you guys say that. It's just so wonderful to see you guys sharing in the same joy of discovering what we discovered. That contrary to what these liars say, the church fathers actually agree with each other. They're like, they disagree with each other. Oh my goodness! I mean, you guys, these Protestants, and even the Cathodox will disagree with each other about tons of issues, tons and tons and tons and tons of issues, and then they'll still have communion with each other. They'll still act like, it doesn't make a difference. But then you find a little teeny tiny contradiction or some disagreement in the early church, and they're like, that's the end of the world, don't listen to them, they're crazy, they all disagree. They have such double standards. They're desperate to find a contradiction. By the way, why do they do this? If they are the original church, why are they always attacking it? Why are they always saying, the early church fathers, they can't be trusted, they got all that stuff wrong? Wait a second. I thought you guys were that church. I thought you're the continuation of that church. Why are you bashing them all the time? That's how you know we aren't coming up with some private interpretation, because you guys actually hate them. They hate the early church. They are not fans of the early church, guys. We are fans of the early church. They are not. And that is really obvious from even a short conversation with these people. They see the early church as a burden. Oh, they see them as a pain in the neck. Oh, great, they're quoting the Ante-Nicene fathers. Oh, man. And we even quote the post-Nicene fathers against them. Isn't that amazing? They didn't completely change after Nicaea. They still agreed mostly with what the early church taught, but on a few issues they compromised. So these poor Cathodox, they can't even find agreement from the first 500 years of church history, guys. Not even the first 600 years. We still have put out an open challenge. Any Cathodox that's listening to this, can you bring us a single church father for the first 500 years of church history who endorses image veneration? Just one church father. I've never found it. I've watched so many apologetics videos. They will pull anything they can find. They will pull forgeries, guys. They don't have a single quote from a church father in the first 500 years teaching even what they say about image worship. So no, like you said, Brian, we would be killing ourselves. We'd be shooting ourselves in the foot if we really did, if we really were hiding stuff about what the church taught. And then we're out here telling you guys to go read it for yourselves. Why would we do that? I mean, we're out of our minds if we're doing that. But obviously, we're telling the truth if we're encouraging you guys to investigate it and to see if what we're saying is true.
I think that in terms of like the church falling away, right, and believing in this apostasy where it's like, in the last days, when Christ returns, that the people who will be saved are those who hold to the apostolic teaching. In terms of this, I guess it's very difficult for some people to swallow, but like that quote I shared, like, I don't know, 2 weeks ago or something from Origen's the commentary on Matthew from the yeah, that one quote where he talks he's commentating on Matthew 24, and he's talking about the state of Christians, talking about the truth being not really being sought by many, few will be investigating into it. But then at the very end, he says that the one who, when he sees these things, um, remains in the apostolic and ecclesiastical teaching will be saved. When I read that, I mean, Luke, I quite literally I got stunned. I had to stop and, like, I don't know, part of my mind just couldn't really process that for some reason, because it was like a shocker to read something like that. Because you guys have said kind of the same thing that Origin said in like different words or in the same manner, and then I just read him say it verbatim almost, on how people will be saved before the Lord returns. It's holding to the original faith and the original teaching of the church, right? So then that made me even think even more of that, like, I mean, yeah, you guys aren't making things up, right? Because I'm not even trying to look for it, and I read Origin talk about that in the 200s, which obviously shows me that, for one, the Cathodox claim that the church will never fall away is clearly false, because Origin, when he's explaining these things, um, he's talking about the state of Christians before Christ returns. Truth will be scarce. Not many will be investigating into it. People are going to be in disagreements, and uh, uh, because of disagreements over the truth, they're going to hate one another. Like reading all that, it kind of shows that, like, yeah, the the church as a institution, like the Catholics might say, is not going to be here. So, like, I think the claims are backed up by what the fathers do say, right? Um, yeah, by just going off what Origen says, I mean, there's so much that can be taken out of it. Um, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yes. And you encourage us, Brian. You on the one hand are saying, oh, I'm so edified by the guys who are teaching us, and at the same time, you are edifying us very much. All of you guys, when you read the Fathers and notice these things and find quotes like you just did where he said, you should add this one from Tertullian's book on baptism. It's wonderful, guys, to have so many witnesses from the early church and then you guys backing it up with you observing it, saying, we see it. We see that the church did say this would happen and that we should be prepared. This is the big final boss in Christianity, is that we would be hit with all these pleasures We'd be distracted with all the luxury and all the entertainment and all these false teachers, and we'd have this adulterous mother, this church, enticing us to betray our father. Just like in real life when a woman leaves her husband and gets a new husband. And she's like, you called this man your dad. How perverted. He's your dad. Call him your dad. That's what's happening right now. They've given us an
Right.
antichrist.
You know, you know what's ironic? They say it's your private interpretation, but you can ask these people, have you actually read the early church fathers? Well, yeah, it's 10 volumes. Yeah, it's a lot. You know, they haven't read the fathers. They haven't investigated these things. These people are just so gullible and foolish that they take the Cathodox, or they just take what they say at face value. They say that they're the early church. They don't investigate the things that the early church say. This guy says that, oh, the church now, the Cathodox, I suppose, they're the ones to preserve the traditions of the church for over 2,000 years. Have you actually looked? Have you actually fact checked these things? Because if you just looked, if you look at the evidence that we can provide to you, that we can present to you, you'll see that no, they're not. They disagree with what the Cathodox say. They would be excommunicated. It's foolish. And these people, yeah, it's just foolish, and it's irritating that they can use these, I guess, hypocritical arguments when you
Yep.
can just turn it around on them.
Yep. And they put themselves in a conundrum where it's impossible to find out what the truth is whenever they make it sound like, well, there are different interpretations even of the church fathers. See, guys, this is really crazy. I mean, you ever notice how in the Bible, the things that the Bible says can be a little ambiguous sometimes? No, I don't think that's true about the divinity of Jesus or faith and works or baptism or our ability to lose salvation. I don't believe that. I think the Bible is very clear. But nevertheless, there are some things that are not so clear. But the church fathers talk about these things at so much length that you pretty much can never find a Protestant who has actually read their statements and thinks it's ambiguous. It's not ambiguous. It's overwhelming. It's just a million punches in the face and in the stomach and all over when you actually read all their statements throughout the centuries on these subjects. There is no denying what they mean. So this is too funny when they make it sound like, well, there are all these different interpretations of the fathers. No. I mean, I just challenge anybody. I will not accept that. I will say, I want you, like I responded to this guy, I'd say, I want you to sit down with me. You choose a subject you think they're ambiguous on, and let's read them. Guys, never concede that in an argument. Just say, show me the subject you think they're ambiguous on, and let's read it. And if they say, well, I can't really do that, or yeah, they're just generally, confusing or something, you just say, look, I've read them, and I think they're perfectly clear. And if you think that they're unclear, you have to prove that. You bring that forward and show me the subject. Don't be vague with me, because that's deceptive.
Yeah. I mean, these people, yeah, they're very slow. That's what I would say because the you know the, they they are supposed to fact check these things. They are supposed to, because if they're interested in the early church, if that's the argument that the Cathodox got them with, right? We are the early church. Investigate these things. Look into these things. Check
Yes.
them.
You're exactly right, Raheem. And like I was just saying, they make it impossible to know the truth now because there are multiple denominations claiming to be the original church. You've got the Catholics, then you've got multiple branches of the Catholics, especially the Sedevacantists, those people who are saying that the current pope is not the real pope. Then, besides the Catholics and their opposing groups, you've got the Orthodox, you've got Eastern Orthodox, and then you've got Oriental Orthodox, a huge branch of Orthodox who say all of the Eastern Orthodox are heretics and they're all damned to hell. And then you've got another group called the Assyrian Church of the East. And then you've got True Orthodox Church. Then you've got Old Believers. And you've got all these different groups that have all excommunicated every single other group and said they're all going to hell. Okay, now when we get these Cathodocs in a room, we always ask them the same question. Guys, how are we supposed to know which of these groups is the original church? And they'll either play games like Protestants and they'll say, oh, there's no way to know. They'll just say, just go to the one that's closest to you. Oh, really? So I should just gamble with my life, with my eternal salvation? And then the other ones will say, well, actually, you have to investigate church history. That's the only way to know which of these churches really is teaching the original doctrines. Okay, well then that means there is a way to understand even the early church's teachings. You're insinuating the early church's teachings will be clear and will direct me to the true church. So if you're now going to say, like Justin is insinuating, well, actually, it's impossible even to understand the church fathers. Okay, well, now we're just hopeless. You've gone from saying, oh, the church fathers help us clarify the scriptures to, well, the church fathers help us clarify the scriptures that are ambiguous or that are contested. But now even the church fathers need an interpreter, even if we have hundreds of quotes from them on virtually every subject. Well, we need somebody to interpret all those hundreds of quotes for us because we're just not sure all those hundreds of quotes are explicit enough. Give me a break. Give me a break.
They're explicit for sure. I witnessed it multiple times now. You will be reading like mountains of quotes to a person, and they'll say, "Let me sit on it." Let me give me a while
Exactly.
because it's so obvious.
Yes,
It's so obvious.
I've experienced, and I've gained a lot of confidence too, because I was curious what their reactions would be. But I've never met a Cathodox who could withstand a barrage of quotes from the Church Fathers. They'll drop that act really quickly, saying that it's ambiguous. They'll say, okay. In fact, Jake and Aaron, two young men who recently challenged us to it, I said, "Do you have a few hours? Let's sit down," because they were saying we don't think the Church Fathers are explicit about condemning image veneration. I said, "Really? Let's read some." And so we just sat there and we read for hours, and it's recorded, and you guys can listen to it if you want a link, Ben or Steven or anybody. And they just sat there, they just got blasted. And at first they put up this act and they were saying, "Yeah, that's not an explicit quote." I said, "Really? Would you like to read another one?" And they're like, "Yeah, I guess." I said, "Okay, here's another one. How about that one?" And he goes, "It doesn't prove anything." I said, "Okay, you want another quote that doesn't prove anything?" And they go, "No." I said, "Really? Here, read this one. If it doesn't prove anything, how come you hate these quotes so much?" I'd say, "Do you agree with what he just said here?" Because first he'd say, "Oh, it doesn't prove anything." And I'll say, "Do you agree with him?" He'll say, "No, I don't agree with him. He's wrong." Wait a second. I thought you just said it doesn't prove anything. Now you're admitting that actually these teachings totally contradict what your church teaches. They want to have it both ways. And eventually by the end of that, like what? What was it, guys? Like 4 or 5 hours with Jake and Aaron? And finally at the end of it, after all this, it doesn't prove anything, they go, "Yeah, all right, I guess some apologist does need to answer this. This is a problem."
Yeah, I mean, you already know this, Luke. It's not a problem of how these things are interpreted. It's just if you read it, you only have two options. If you see the evidence, it's either you want to kiss the stones, you want to worship the material, you want to be an icon slave, or you want the truth. But unfortunately, these people, they love material. They just don't
Yes.
want the truth, unfortunately.
Yes. They love the earth. They are carnally minded, and that's why, as Paul says, they can't understand spiritual things. It's impossible because they're still glued to the earth, as John Chrysostom says. Glued to it. Okay, so after I answered his questions, much shorter versions of what I told you guys, he asked some follow-up questions. I just want to make sure you guys have responses to these things, that you're confident, that you know you have the truth. And if you don't, I want you to ask me right now, and I'll do my best with the brothers to answer anything you would ask about his questions. So he has some follow-up questions. Number one, after I told him, yes, the church's leaders did fall into apostasy, but not in every single doctrine, he says, number one, does that mean that the Nicene Creed and the other good things formulated at the other councils, such as the council that established Jesus has two wills, he says, are those things all bad? The creed and the councils? He says, also, leaders didn't impose doctrine at these councils. What in the world does he mean by that? Or does he mean emperors didn't impose doctrine? What does he mean by that? He knows nothing about history. I won't even respond to something so totally ignorant to say that the leaders didn't impose doctrine. They literally believe that the emperors have to convene a council and lay down the doctrine in order for it to be ecumenical. And every emperor did that ever brought an ecumenical council. Except for Constantine. He's the only one that didn't. But all the ones afterward did. Anyway, he says, is everything bad? What do you guys think the answer is to this? Just everything that every council ever taught is all bad? Just everything's bad? Come on.
No,
Give me a break.
no.
We're not even going to give.
Um,
It's just so silly. We'll go to the next
yeah,
question.
okay, never mind.
He says, number 2, wasn't Tertullian against infant baptism? So I asked him to give me an example of something that the church fathers disagree about, and he says, well, wasn't Tertullian against infant baptism? Incredible. I asked him to give me an example of the church fathers not being unanimous, and he gives me an example of a man who not only contradicted the church and got excommunicated, but he even contradicted himself when he used to be Orthodox. And he thinks this is an example of the church not agreeing for 300 years. Is that not incredible? And I tell you guys, if they had a better example, they would bring it. We've asked them so many times, can you please give us an example of the church fathers disagreeing? They just can't bring anything.
Slim
They might,
pickings.
yeah.
It is.
I don't have anything.
It's slim pickings. And then he says Tertullian had strange views about predestination, but Justin Martyr and others believed in free will. What is he talking about? This is just a
Similar.
kid. He's just a kid. He's just coming up with stuff. He's pulling it out of thin air. He has absolutely no idea what he's talking about.
Oh, but he did say at the number 5, I didn't really read church fathers.
I didn't really read church fathers.
So if that means he hasn't really read, then number 2, he probably got it from somewhere online or something he heard from
Some weird
someone.
website. I mean,
Because
Tertullian. Go ahead.
yeah, I was at work and I look at this comment. I was like, what? I was so confused because I'm like, what? The Tertullian always talks about free will. What is he talking about? And especially since he talks about like you mentioned, um, Tertullian affirms infant baptism and on the soul, right, in his treatise on the soul. I think it's like chapter 29 or something around there. Um, and then I also thought about because he's talking about his views in predestination and then trying to pin that maybe against Justin and others who believe in free will. But I was also thinking about how the fathers also do explain how both predestination and free will both can go together. They
Of
affirming
course.
both aspects.
Oh, of
Like
course.
like like Clement of Alexandria, I know he has one example. I know Origin does. I have those on my saved, and also who was the other one? Peter in Recognitions. Uh, talk about Uranus. Yeah. T- uh, I'm sorry that my mind's all over the place, but um, like they explain these things, like explaining how predestination works with free will, and even teaching it like it's something normal. Like Clement of Alexandria in the Stramata, when he talks about these things, he's just teaching it like normal. He's not really explaining how it like somehow how it it's a problem that must be fixed. He's just giving scripture on both points, predestination and free will, and he makes it seem like it's not even an issue. So when I saw this, I was just so confused, like tr trying to maybe pin Tertullian against Justin when they're both the same. Like they both can go together just fine.
Yes. Again, we can see who really loves the early church and who hates them. Because this isn't the behavior of someone who loves the early church fathers. This is the behavior of someone who has no respect for them, also no knowledge of them. But what's ironic is that even the so-called educated Cathodox do this exact same thing. They will attack the early church, try to make them sound uneducated, like they're at war with each other, like they're not in communion with each other, and it's also just easily disproven. Tertullian is one of the biggest destroyers of the Gnostics, and the Gnostics all denied free will. Tertullian tears them apart.
Oh no, I think he got us with the free will thing.
Yeah, he got us.
I
Yeah,
mean, he definitely got us. I mean,
give me a break. Okay.
it's just insane. I mean, free will is one of the things that I guess like all of the church fathers talk about. It's such a fundamental thing. If
You
you read at least one book from Tertullian, it's going to be there. It's going to
Yes,
be there.
yes, from any of them. And we're talking hundreds of quotes, just like so many other subjects. Hundreds. There was no variety of teaching on this subject. And then he says, the one that we've all heard, didn't Ignatius of Antioch say that without a bishop, there is no church? No. He says that everybody should convene with the bishop. That's all he says. He says, wherever the bishop is, there let the church be. There let the church gather. And they make that out to be, well, without the bishop, like if the bishop dies one day, Or if he turns into a heretic, then just the church just disappears, doesn't exist anymore. That's incredible. Here's what Ignatius actually says. You want to see what Ignatius actually says? When Ignatius was being led away to die, he wrote 7 letters. And in one of his letters, as he's about to go, he says this: remember in your prayers the church in Syria. So guys, that's where he was bishop of Antioch in Syria. He says, remember in your prayers the church in Syria, which now has God for its shepherd instead of me. Jesus Christ alone will oversee it, and your love. Wow. It's almost like Ignatius didn't think that the church completely ceased to exist in Syria just because he was about to die. He says, the church in Syria now has God for its shepherd instead of me. Jesus alone will oversee it. It's almost like we have quotes to refute every single thing they say.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to read this quote that I sent from Tertullian real quick, to just expel that, like,
The free will stuff.
that utter nonsense, you can just read it.
Let's read this
First
from
part.
Tertullian. This is his against Marcion, Book 2. He says, now, if there were in God such attributes as must have rendered it both impossible and improper for any evil to have happened to man, and yet evil did occur, let us consider man's condition also, whether it were not, in fact, rather the cause why that came to pass which could not have happened through God. I find, then, that man was by God constituted free, master of his own will and power, indicating the presence of God's image and likeness in him by nothing so well as by this constitution of his nature. For it was not by his face, and by the lineaments of his body, though they were so varied in his human nature, that he expressed his likeness to the form of God, but he showed his stamp in that essence which he derived from God himself, that is, the spiritual, which answered to the form of God, and in the freedom and power of his will. This his state was confirmed even by the very law which God then imposed upon him. For a law would not be imposed upon one who had it not in his power to render that obedience which is due to law. Nor again would the penalty of death be threatened against sin if a contempt of the law were impossible to man in the liberty of his will. It's a great one. And of course, we've all read these a million times from every church father. They all say the same thing. Isn't it great? Just like Isaiah said, God made it so that we have quotes against every type of heresy and objection. I'm telling you guys, the church fathers are our greatest weapon against heresy. Of course, the scriptures are a very sharp two-edged sword that cuts it to pieces. But you understand, Satan is so crafty, he's taken the scriptures and he's tried to use it as a weapon. Just like as if a weapon of a king were dropped on the floor or it were offered to someone else. And that man did not know how to wield it properly, and instead he used it to stab his friends, stab people on his own team. That's what's happened to the scriptures. It's been picked up and used by the enemy to stab us. And yes, that is exactly what has happened. We are being attacked by the scriptures, but the church fathers are the correct interpreters of it. And they will not stab you. Their unanimous teaching will rescue you. They will actually show you how to wield that weapon. Makes me think of Goliath's sword. Remember when David was with his friends, he was being hunted by Saul, and he went over to the tabernacle, and the priest offered David and his companions some bread. And David said, I need a weapon. I don't even have a weapon. Do you have one? And he says, we've got Goliath's sword here. David was able to wield that thing. Can you imagine how large that sword was? But that's what we have, guys. The scriptures are just a massive sword that requires skill. It requires knowledge to wield it properly. Otherwise, it's so heavy, it's so clunky, you're going to just drop it or it's going to fall back on you and cut you or something. We should not be so hasty to wield something like that without skill, without experience.
So I need to be trained by someone who knows
Yeah,
how to use
exactly.
scriptures.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's rocket science right here.
It's all so complicated. All right, we will go ahead and respond just to the last parts. So he says, didn't Ignatius of Antioch say that without a bishop there's no church? Oh my goodness, no. No, and I'm so tired of hearing that. They also say the same thing about Cyprian. Cyprian and every church father stresses that you must listen to your bishop, that the church is united when it's united under its bishop. But Cyprian will say just as many times that if you have an evil bishop, you have to flee from him. You guys should, I mean, I've read letter 67 of Cyprian so many times, I almost have it memorized. But through that whole letter, he says, run for your life from a heretical bishop. Do not submit to him. Okay. He says, number 4, after I said that, yes, we baptize and we take the Eucharist apart from priests, he says, sorry, but this feels kind of odd. This is kind of isolated, without history or continuity. No martyrs and saints? So he's saying, where are all the martyrs and saints? This is just too ironic, too funny to hear somebody say. They say, well, where are your martyrs and saints that have your beliefs? Flip it back on them, guys. Ask them, where in the first 500 years of church history are there any people that believe the doctrines of your church? Name one person. Who is actually in more trouble? The person who holds to the church's unanimous teachings for the first 300 years, and even beyond that, we find way more commonality with them. Way more with the church of the first 500 or 600 years than with the Cathodox. Who is in more danger, us or them? We actually do have people in the first 300 years who've laid down our beliefs that we adhere to. And we even still have agreement with them beyond. Whereas the Cathodox have absolutely no agreement. They can't find one person who has all of their doctrines in the first 300 years, and not even the first 500 years. Not even one bishop for the first 500 years has all the Catholic or the Orthodox doctrines. So who's in more trouble? I want you guys to hear this refutation I'm making. I want you to find more safety in what we believe than what they believe, because there is more safety. I want you to feel relieved and assured that it is much safer to agree with the unanimous church that taught the same thing for hundreds of years than to believe in the current churches. To pick a random one, Catholic or Orthodox, some branch of Orthodox, and they say, well, you can't find your beliefs in any church today. That's what they'll say to you. You can't find anybody today. All right, well, you have to pick one. Which one makes you more comfortable? To believe what the church believed from the beginning for centuries, which does not exist today in any large institution, or to believe what some large institution today believes, but that you cannot find for the first 500 years of church history? Which one makes you feel safer? And you have to make that choice for yourself. And you know the choice that we have made, Ben and Stephen. I know you guys are all on board, but I'm singling you out because I want you guys to be familiar with these arguments. Yes, we are very content. We are very confident to be in agreement with the early church. We are not intimidated. We are not uneasy to see that there is no institution today that teaches these original doctrines. The Cathodox are the ones who should feel uneasy. They're like, where are your martyrs and saints? Well, again, where are theirs? They can't point to one person in the first 500 years who agrees with them. They are claiming these people as their martyrs and saints, but that's not really fair. They're doing an illegal move. This is an illegal chess move. You can't claim your opponent's pieces as your pieces. They can't claim people who would actually condemn them as heretics as their own saints. They can't do that. If they tried to do that with John Chrysostom, if John Chrysostom could meet them, or Basil, or Hilary, or anybody, Jerome, Athanasius, anybody, they would all say, you guys are heretics. So it's just deceptive to say, well, we've got the saints. Well, you're calling them your saints, but they're not really your saints. We deny that they are yours because they contradict you. You deceive people. And in fact, if we could make them sit down and read what those fathers actually say, we could get the Cathodox to condemn them. And they're going to do this other game. They're going to say, well, they were wrong about a lot of things, but they're still our saints. I see. So you're condemning them, and you're just assuming that if they were here, they would just accept your correction. They just say, yeah, you're right, Cathodox. we were wrong about a lot of things, and you guys are in charge. You, our grandchildren, you guys teach us. And we're not your teachers. You, the younger babies that came along many centuries later, who are spoiled playing video games all day. You guys are our teachers. We submit to you. They really imagine that. They think that would happen. But we all know better. And here's number 5. He says, I don't really read the Church Fathers. I just read the article against icons. And it is kind of good, he says. Though most of the writings are against idols, like the pagans. So he's saying it's not against our images, it's really against idols. And he says, but I must admit there are some that are against the orthodox idea of icons. That even if you don't venerate the image but the one in it, it's still bad. Well, that's some honesty. Props to you, Justin. Justin, if you do come on board, which I hope you do, we pray for you to have clarity if you watch this video. Props to you for being honest enough to admit that. But the truth is, every single quote in that list absolutely annihilates the Cathodox idea of image worship.
I'm just thinking about how um, he says, let's see, though most of the writings are against uh, idols like the pagans. Well, like you've pointed out, and I think anyone may see just reading those quotes, why is it that whenever that in none of those quotes do they ever talk about the Christian images? It's always like they're making a distinction that doesn't really exist when you actually read what they say. Of course they're bashing, maybe they're bashing pagan images, but they're not saying that they have that Christians have images themselves. So they're just bashing images. They're not really making a distinguish. At least from what I see, they're not making a distinction between. Oh yeah, we have that we have our images and then they have theirs.
Exactly. Never one statement about it. But instead, when they do attack images, they're attacking them because they are material. They say we would never bow ourselves down to some material object. Yes, so true. But we've gone over that to death. But I'll still do it more if anybody wants to. I never get tired of it. In fact, I enjoy it. I look forward to when we're going to have
Not
more
today.
calls. No, not today. We'd be here for 10 hours. I just can't even believe how many quotes we have on this subject. It is unbelievable. They're like, show me the quote. That's one of the greatest lines. Show me the quote. The quote. Do you have a few hours? See, they could show us all of their quotes on image worship. They could show it in less than 5 minutes. All of their fake quotes. I mean, I'm talking like 3 minutes. That's how few quotes they have in the first 500 years of church history. And almost all of them are forgeries. But they have a few legitimate quotes that they simply twist. Like Basil's. They love that Basil quote. And actually, Basil's quote destroys them. That's an amazing thing about these people is oftentimes they'll quote something. And then when you actually read it, they'll say, well, he was an idiot. Oh, I see. Thank you. They do that with Eusebius. Yes, Kevon, you're right. We got to leave early tomorrow. So I'll wrap it up here, guys.
I just want to say, I think we should have more of these calls where, I guess we repeat the things that we've learned, to keep us sharp and to correct us in any areas where we're lacking. Um, yeah, definitely.
Yes, guys, I'm sorry for neglecting. We of course we will. We will be having these for the rest of our lives as long as the internet exists. We will always have these calls. And Ben intends
Yeah.
to come visit us soon, so I can't wait to see him. And looking forward to any of.
Wait, I thought he went already.
He wasn't able to. He's coming over again. But I mean, Isaiah is coming over in just a few days. He's coming over this week. And I'm sure I'll be seeing more of you guys eventually. Can't wait to see Isaiah.
Also, Luke, you gotta show me how to edit things on that website.
Oh yes, Raheem. You don't know how to do it yet? Yeah, just call me, or maybe tomorrow or something, and I'll help you with it.
Yeah, maybe after I get off work.
Cool. All right, guys. Good seeing all of you. Hope you're edified.
That was a great call. I liked it.
It's a keeper. I will upload it as long as the audio is not disastrous. All right, farewell, guys. God be with you.
God bless.
Bye.
Fuck me.